Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and in today's video I'm going to be describing for you the Jungian model of the psyche. Alright, so in today's video, I'm going to be describing the Jungian psychological model. Now, I want to tell you a bit about my own personal experiences learning about Jungian psychology. So when I was 20 years old, I had some plant medicine-induced awakening experiences. And while there was so much insight and these were really beautiful experiences that helped me get in touch with deeper parts of myself, and there was almost like an instantaneous bringing to consciousness of so many different parts of myself, it ultimately left me quite confused. And I think it was Jung himself even that said, beware of unearned wisdom. And I would add a little bit to that beware of unearned wisdom because it will make you earn it. And so these experiences, while very, let's say, mind expanding and very beautiful, actually put me into a bit of a meaning crisis. And it created a lot of fuzziness of understanding myself, understanding my place in the world, understanding my worldview, and particularly with understanding the way that my inner world works. And so several years later, when I was 23, that's when I happened across a Jungian author called Jean Raffa. And from there, she basically had some really great bibliographies in the back of her book. So I started reading books from a lot of different Jungian authors, including Jung himself. And in that process of reading these different Jungian authors, I started to get a much clearer sense of inner space, where it was oh, okay, this is how things are functioning, and that's why this thing happened that way, and that's why this happened that way. And so I tend to find that understanding these types of models, and in particular the Jungian model, is really helpful for inner space navigation in a way that no other model that I've ever found has been, which is why I focus so much on the Jungian psychological model on my channel. So in this video, I'm going to be describing two distinct vantage points that intersect and overlap with one another. And these were the ways that Jung understood the sort of what was happening in the internal world of the psyche. And so the very first I'm going to go into is the personal conscious, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious. So these three layers of the psyche were something that Jung described in his work. So basically the personal unconscious is the sense of your ego, the parts of yourself that you can easily remember and recall. And it's that center point of consciousness where it seems like that just is who you are. So that is the personal conscious. Now, a layer deeper than that, we have the personal unconscious. And this is where the shadow resides. So that place in the human psyche where we push away parts of ourselves and we repress them away. And the personal unconscious is very unique to the individual. And it's where we relegate our personal qualities that we are unable or unwilling to, let's say, integrate with at a given time. And we can end up with repressed memories in the personal unconscious. So in the personal unconscious, we have memories, potentials, and aspects of the personality that we either have not yet integrated or that we have specifically repressed. And so the personal conscious and the personal unconscious are the individual parts of the psyche. But Jung also posited a collective unconscious. And in the collective unconscious, this is where we find the archetypes, which are blueprints of human meaning that can be found across all cultures and eras. And the idea is that all human beings share one singular collective unconscious that we are all interacting with. So we have the more individual parts of the psyche, but then we also have this deeper unconscious layer that might, throw archetypes up in dreams, or that we might, let's say, be interacting with that's also common to other people. And being able to think about the psyche from these three different layers can be very, very helpful for getting that sense of inner space. And that's that vantage point within the Jungian model, which is fairly simple and fairly straightforward and easy to understand. But there's also another angle through which to look at the Jungian model that's a little bit more specific and that really gets down into the weeds of the 5 different components of the personal unconscious and the individual unconscious and how it connects to the collective unconscious. But before we get into that vantage point within the Jungian model of the psyche, I wanted to mention that I have a group coaching program called Shadowwork for Self-Sabotage, which is for ambitious people who want to use shadow work to pinpoint and resolve the underlying reasons for behaviors like procrastination or other motivational blocks or like self-sabotage that hold people back from achieving the goals that they want to achieve. And right now I have a bunch of beta testers currently in the program testing it, and I'm getting feedback from them to make it into its highest and best version, and I'll be officially fully launching it in July, on July 21st. And so if you are interested in meeting with me sometime between now and July 21st, and you would like to schedule a discovery call to see if the group program is a good fit for you, then go ahead and click the link down below in the description box. So let's get into that 5-faceted vantage point of the Jungian model. So before, again, we have personal conscious, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious, and that's one vantage point. The other vantage point is to think about it from the perspective of persona, ego, shadow, anima and animus, and self. And when I think about the Jungian model, this is the way that I tend to interact with it more. Like, it's good to have the broad view with the personal conscious, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious. But it also is, I find, a lot more user-friendly of a concept to really dive deep into what's going on in the inner world. Now, instead of starting with the persona, which is sort of the smallest, most outward-facing aspect of the personality within the Jungian model of the psyche, I'm going to start first with the ego, because the ego is the center point of your personality. It's the part of you that you call me and I. And so all of these things will make a lot more sense if you think about it from the vantage point of the ego, because that is the vantage point that you are coming from. So like I said, the ego is everything that we believe that we are. It's the center point of the personality. It's what we call me or I. And we have a whole entire, very complex self-concept centered around the ego. And the ego also connects deeply in with a broader worldview. So we have the identity itself, which is a collection of beliefs about ourselves, and we also have our worldview, which is a collection of beliefs about reality. And our collection of beliefs about ourselves and our collection of beliefs about our reality are fully intertwined with one another. And so if our worldview gets undermined, our ego also gets undermined, and our sense of identity gets undermined, because those are both parts of the ego. The example that I like to give is, let's say that I'm the pharaoh in ancient Egypt. Well, maybe I have certain ideas about myself, but those ideas and beliefs about myself only have meaning within the greater cosmology of the ancient Egyptian religion. And so within that, there's this understanding that the pharaoh is like God on earth, is the morning and the evening star, is like the center. And so within the ancient Egyptian cosmology, it is the thing that actually gives meaning to the identity of being the pharaoh. Now, the reason why I use this is because that's a certain role that someone can play. And if somebody went around claiming to be pharaoh in, let's say, modern day American society, let's say, it wouldn't have that kind of meaning. Or even if like a bunch of people dubbed that person the pharaoh, it wouldn't have the same kind of meaning, because it doesn't relate to that broader cosmology. Now, individually, we all have our own sense of identity, but those identities only have meaning within the greater worldview. And so what our ego is it is our identity plus our worldview and our sense of like it being the center of our consciousness. And there is an apparent sense of me or I, as well as what isn't me or I. And that's where like we get the shadow and things like that. And I'll explain about the shadow in just a minute with the shadow's relationship with the ego. But let's first go into the persona. Now, the persona is the smallest component of the Jungian model of the psyche. And so while the identity is how you see yourself, what you believe about yourself, and how your personal identity fits into the broader worldview that you have, and that sense of being centered, being the center of the personality, and I'm like this and I'm not like that. That's what ego is. With the persona is about the social mask, or what I prefer to call the social lens through which we express that ego. And so it is the way that we try to show up in day-to-day life in a social matrix. And the persona can vary within different social matrices. For example, you might show up with a slightly different persona around your parents than you would around your friends, and a slightly different persona around your friends than you would around your boss. And so different social lenses are required in order to adapt within the environment. And so while the ego is all of the things that you believe to be true about yourself and that sense of this being the center of your identity, with the persona, it's specifically the way that you are showing up in life and the way that you want others to perceive you and the way that you believe that others perceive you. And ultimately, the persona can only ever truly express a fraction of what's there in the ego, let alone other aspects of the personality. Now, the next component of the Jungian psychological model that I'm going to go over is the shadow. And I talk about the shadow a lot on this channel. So the shadow is defined specifically in relation to what the ego says that it isn't. So anytime we have a polarization within the ego where we try to hyper-identify with a quality that we consider to be the good quality, we will also push away and repress and deny parts of ourselves that we might consider to be in the bad quality. There's also other reasons why we repress parts into the shadow. So we can also repress parts into the shadow to cope with trauma and to cope with unmet needs. But on an identity and worldview based level, we are basically, from the perspective of the ego, we want to get a sense of I'm like this and I'm not like that. And so the more polarizations we have and the stronger our judgments that we have, the narrower our ego becomes and the more dense our shadow becomes. And so the shadow is basically all of the parts of ourself that we try to chuck out of the personality. And we don't do this consciously. We just truly come to believe that I'm like this and I'm not like that. And we ignore strategically these parts of ourself that we've repressed away into the shadow. All right, so the next component of the Jungian model is the Anima and the Animus. And there is a lot that's quite mysterious about the Anima and the Animus because you're getting into these deeper components of the psyche. And so the Anima is said to be the inner woman in every man, and the Animus is said to be the inner man in every woman. And so basically the Anima has to do with connection with the unconscious contents, and the Animus has to do with, let's say, communication and being able to crystallize that information from the unconscious into things that are easily processable from the perspective of the intellect. And so in the Jungian model, which divides things strongly by gender in this sense. And now I think about it a little bit different because I've also gone into opposition with my feminine side before, and I found that I've had to cultivate a deeper relationship to the feminine myself because of other reasons why I went into opposition to the feminine. And I've also had to cultivate a relationship with my masculine side and my animus. And so what I would say is when it comes to embracing the wholeness of both the masculine and the feminine aspects of the self, what you're trying to do is you're essentially trying to, let's say, connect to the feminine to give to yourself a deeper connection to the unconscious. So within the myth of Sleeping Beauty, there's the prince that goes in and has to get past the thorns and has to defeat the dragon in order to get to the sleeping princess. And then he kisses the sleeping princess and the sleeping princess wakes up. That is what it's like to get into connection with the anima or the feminine side. It is going into the unconscious, into the mystery, and into the darkness to be able to sort of almost awaken sleeping potential within the unconscious. And then what the masculine side is about is it's about being able to be with that unconscious contents and to be able to crystallize it and form it into a form that the intellect can easily understand and communicate. And so being able to cultivate both of these aspects of yourself is incredibly important, especially when it comes to connecting to the self, which is the next component that I'm going to be talking about and the final component of the Jungian psychological model. And so with the Jungian concept of the self can be quite ineffable. And the idea is that the more you can connect to your shadow and the more that you can integrate your anima or animus, the more access you get to the self. And this is the self with a capital S. So it's not like the small self, small s self, which is like the ego. It's like, oh, this is me and this is who I am and here's my self-concept and here's my life and here are all these things. So that's not what's meant by the self. The self is much deeper, and it's the sense that all parts of you, in the Jungian psychological model, from the persona to the ego to the shadow to the anima and the animus, those are all part of self, but they exist within the broader universe of self itself. And so I like to think about it a bit like, let's say that you as the small self, you as the ego, you are, let's say, thinking of yourself as a twig on a tree. And that's the entirety of the way that you're thinking about yourself. And then as you start to explore your shadow and as you start to explore the anima and the animus and you start to open up your self-concept, you start to realize that, oh, there's like a whole branch that this individual self is related to. And then getting in touch with the self is like recognizing that you're the tree or that you're the forest. So there's like a much deeper understanding of who you are, and it's like something that's more unitive, so definitely in the Jungian model with the collective unconscious would also be part of self, and all of the different components from the personal unconscious to the individual to the personal consciousness to the personal unconscious, to all of the other 4 elements of the other vantage point of the Jungian psychological model. All of those are happening within the universe of self. And in my experiences, where I've started to see through the illusion of ego and started to see past, like the sense of ego as the center point of the self, there's this expansion out into this recognition of this larger sense of self and this sense of oneness that comes about from that, because the self is not personal but is collective, is something that undergirds all things. And so in the same way that the collective unconscious undergirds all human experience, the self is even more expansive than that. The self is all things. And so it's going from this more individual sense of being the twig and then realizing you're this infinite tree. And so there's always this capacity as the small self to decenter and to dissolve and to be able to recognize yourself as that deeper unitive consciousness. All right, so that is the Jungian psychological model in a nutshell. Very helpful for being able to get a clearer sense of inner space and to be able to navigate things, because it can be quite invisible to do all of this inner work. And so if you have this model in mind, it helps you get your bearings. It helps you kind of understand what it is that you're interacting with. And anyway, that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button down below and subscribe and leave me a comment down below. Also, if you would like to meet me on a discovery call to see if you're a good fit for my Shadowwork for Self-Sabotage program, go ahead, click that link now. And if you would like to learn more about Shadowwork, go ahead and check out this next video. And until next time, keep becoming more you.